I've always been the kind of guy who values peace and stability. My name's Jack, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a marketing manager, and though my job can get demanding, I try to keep things balanced. I've always lived with my parents, not because I had to, but because I liked it. We had this unspoken routine, and it was comfortable. It wasn't crowded, we didn't argue much, and we shared the responsibilities. I guess you could say we were a close-knit family. Then, one day, I got a call from my sister Lisa's mom. She was going through a rough patch, and Lisa, who was 25 at the time, and her brother Tom, 28, were in a tough spot too. They'd been struggling to find stable work, and things weren't looking good for them. They didn't have anywhere else to go, and Lisa's mom had asked me if it'd be all right if they stayed with us for a while. I didn't think twice about it. I told her, of course they can stay here. I figured it'd be a temporary thing, just until they could get back on their feet. When Lisa and Tom moved in, everything seemed fine. At first, it was like nothing had changed. We had dinners together, watched TV, and the occasional Sunday family outing. I didn't mind it. In fact, I kind of liked it. There was something comforting about having the house filled with voices, even if it was just for a little while. They were both easygoing and, I thought, grateful for the roof over their heads. They'd help out a little, but mostly they seemed content just being there. I was happy to help. Family comes first, right? I didn't mind picking up groceries or making sure everyone had what they needed. I was used to it. My parents, especially my mom, weren't exactly young anymore, so I'd always been the one to pitch in. And besides, helping out my niece and nephew felt like the right thing to do. But the first signs of trouble weren't obvious at first. They weren't glaring red flags. It was the small things, the little changes that started to creep in. I'd noticed that the house was getting messier, and instead of offering to clean or pitch in, they'd just sit there watching TV or playing games on their phones. Lisa, especially, had this way of acting like she didn't see it, as if the mess didn't matter. And Tom was always a little more manipulative, finding excuses to avoid any chores. He'd say he was too tired after a long day of job hunting, but I began to notice that he wasn't really looking for work. For the first few weeks, I brushed it off. I told myself they were just adjusting. Maybe they were feeling overwhelmed or stressed about their situation. It made sense, right? But as the weeks turned into months, it became harder to ignore. They weren't just adjusting. They were settling in, like they expected everything to be handed to them. There were days when I'd come home from work, already exhausted, and I'd find the house in complete chaos, dishes piled up in the sink, the bathroom a mess, and nothing seemed to be getting done. And when I tried to say something about it, there was always an excuse or a vague promise to do it later. It wasn't like they weren't capable of helping out. Lisa had a job for a while, though it was part-time and didn't pay much. Tom, on the other hand, had just been going through the motions, pretending to look for work, but never really putting in the effort. It was clear to me that they were comfortable. Too comfortable. I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. After all, they were family, and helping them out was what I was supposed to do. But as time passed, I started to feel something that was hard to ignore: resentment. Every time I picked up the slack, it felt like I was being taken for granted. I wasn't just doing them a favor anymore. I was carrying the weight of their responsibility on my shoulders. I'd clean the kitchen, do the laundry, pay for the groceries, all while they lounged around as if it was their right. And every time I tried to talk to them, I was met with excuses. Lisa would give me a smile and say, "Sorry, I've just been really busy. I'll get to it later." But it was always later, never now. Tom would complain that he was stressed, out, and needed a break from job hunting, though I could tell he wasn't really trying. The tension started to build up, but I didn't want to rock the boat. I kept telling myself, it's just a phase. They'll figure it out. I can be patient. I didn't want to be the one to create conflict, especially in a family where things were usually so smooth. But in the back of my mind, I kept wondering, how long can I keep this up? The house that used to feel like home started to feel like a prison. I wasn't just frustrated with Lisa and Tom anymore. I was frustrated with myself for letting it go on for so long. I wanted to be understanding, but the truth was, I was being used. They had become dependent on me, and I was too afraid to put a stop to it. I kept thinking, what if they get mad at me? What if I ruin the family dynamic? But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I needed to make a change. I remember clearly the moment when it all began to sink in. At first, I felt just a light frustration here and there, but over time, it became impossible to ignore the situation. Something had shifted in the dynamics of the house, but I was so caught up in the idea that, because we were family, I should be understanding and patient, that I didn't realize how far things had gone off course. I was being pulled, and I didn't even realize how much it was affecting my life, my well-being. It was a normal day when the realization hit me. I came home from work, tired as usual, expecting at least a bit of peace. As I had come to expect, the house was messy. Empty soda bottles and fast food wrappers were scattered across the living room, and the kitchen once again looked like a disaster zone. I plopped down on the couch for a moment, trying to calm my mind. But then Lisa and Tom walked into the room, laughing, talking about something they had seen on TV. They were completely oblivious to what was around them. My mom, as usual, was busy in the kitchen, but it didn't seem like she was noticing the mess spreading throughout the house. It was then, for a second, I felt a shift in my head. I was there, exhausted, trying to hold everything together, and no one seemed to care. No one appeared to realize the time and energy I was spending trying to keep things going wasn't being returned. The house was becoming my responsibility alone, and that reality began to weigh on me. Not just physically, but mentally as well. The physical exhaustion turned into emotional strain, and I couldn't see this as something simple anymore, something I was doing out of love and duty because we were family. That night, as I took a shower, trying to reflect on everything, something became clear to me. I couldn't keep living this way. Not because I didn't love my family, but because I was letting myself be used without receiving anything in return. I wanted to be kind, but something needed to change. I started thinking about all the conversations I'd had with Lisa and Tom, trying gently to ask them for help around the house. The responses were always the same. "I'm tired, Jack," or "I've been busy with other things." When I spoke about finding a job or taking on more responsibilities, the conversation would quickly shift to another topic, as if the issue had never been raised. When I finally got Tom to talk about work, his most frequent excuse was that he couldn't find anything that motivated him. Lisa was more interested in staying home, watching TV, even though she had promised several times she'd look for a job. I knew this situation was draining me, but a doubt persisted. Was I being selfish? Was I expecting too much? Over the following days, my frustration only grew. I felt more and more exhausted each day. My job was already draining enough, and coming home to face this emotional and physical mess became too much. With every step into the house, there was something new I had to do. A pile of dirty dishes, clothes scattered everywhere, or someone asking me to pick up more groceries. It didn't seem to end. Lisa and Tom, on the other hand, were there, as if nothing was happening, as if they were just waiting for me to do it all. I found myself repeating the same thought in my head over and over. This isn't fair. I didn't want to be the kind of person who creates drama over anything, but the situation was consuming me. I wanted to understand their point of view. I wanted to be patient and give them time to figure things out. But the truth was, I was running out of patience. What started as an attempt to help, with the hope that they'd get their act together and move forward, was now making me feel trapped. Trapped in my own home, trapped in a cycle of responsibilities and sacrifices that kept growing. I wasn't helping anymore. I was being used. It was during a conversation with my mom, one of those times when we were just sitting at the table after dinner, when I realized she had noticed the shift too. She asked how things were at home, and I, once again, found myself pretending everything was fine. "It's all under control, Mom," I said, but my voice wasn't convincing. She looked at me with those eyes of hers, the ones that know when something isn't right. She could see things had changed, but preferred not to comment. She was trying, like me, to keep the peace, not rock the boat. I wanted to shout to her how overwhelmed I was, how exhausted I felt, but I didn't. I couldn't put it into words, not yet. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I thought more about what had been happening. I had allowed this to go on for too long. I was enabling something that wasn't fair to me. I wasn't angry, not entirely. I was tired. Tired of being the only one holding everything together while they drifted along. I began to see that if something didn't change soon, I'd either burn out completely or risk losing myself in this dynamic. I wasn't doing them a favor. I was doing Uma disservice to Mim. As the days went by, I found myself thinking more and more about how things were in the house. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The tension had been building up for months. Every day felt like an emotional battleground. I would wake up tired, go to work exhausted, and then come home to face the same cycle of demands. Lisa and Tom, oblivious to how hard it was becoming for me, kept living their lives as if everything was fine. I wanted to believe that things would improve if I just kept being patient, but deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. It was late one evening when the breaking point came. I had just gotten home after a particularly tough day at work, my mind heavy with all the things I still had to deal with. As I opened the door, the usual sight greeted me. The house was a mess, with clothes thrown on the couch, dishes piled up, and the TV blaring in the background. Tom was on the couch, gaming as usual, while Lisa was scrolling through her phone, seemingly lost in her world. My mom, as usual, was in the kitchen, doing the dishes but not noticing how much everything else had slipped. I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene. Something in me snapped. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I couldn't take it anymore. Every muscle in my body tensed. I walked into the living room trying to keep my calm, but I knew my patience had run out. Tom, can you please turn down the volume? And Lisa, could you give me a hand with the dishes? I've been asking for days now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the frustration boiling inside me. But Tom didn't even look up. He just waved his hand dismissively, as if it was no big deal. Lisa barely acknowledged me, mumbling something that sounded like, later. My heart raced as my frustration reached its peak. I had tried everything. Gentle requests, subtle, hints, even outright begging. But nothing was getting through. It was like I was invisible. I was tired of being the one who had to do everything, tired of carrying the weight of this house on my shoulders alone. Enough! I finally shouted, my voice trembling with anger. I'm done! The room went silent. Even my mom, who had been quietly humming in the kitchen, froze. I didn't know what came over me, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. I turned to face my family, feeling the weight of every word I was about to say. I've been doing everything around here, and no one seems to care. I've asked. I've begged. I've tried to keep everything going. But you two act like it's not your problem. My voice was shaking now, a mix of frustration, hurt, and exhaustion. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I'm not your servant, I'm your family. I looked at Lisa and Tom, hoping they'd see the pain in my eyes, but they just stared back blankly, as if my outburst was nothing more than an inconvenience. My mother finally stepped in, her voice soft but firm. Jack, calm down, she said, though I could tell she was uncomfortable with the way I was talking. You know we don't mean to upset you. But I couldn't calm down. Not anymore. I needed to be heard. No, Mom, I can't do this anymore. I've been doing everything. I've been patient. I've been understanding, but it's not working. I've been carrying all of this, and no one is even trying to help. I'm tired, Mom. I'm just so tired. The words came out in a rush, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding in until that moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of realization in my mom's eyes. She looked at me, and I could tell that she was starting to understand the toll this was taking on me. The guilt in her face was evident, but it was too late to take back what had been said. There was a long, tense silence that followed. Lisa and Tom didn't say anything, and neither did my mom. I could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air, but at the same time, there was something else. A sense of release. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. I had finally said what needed to be said. "Jack," my mom began, her voice softer than usual. I had no idea it had gotten this bad. I nodded, too exhausted to say anything else. The relief I felt was like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but at least I had taken the first step. I had stood up for myself, even if it meant shaking the foundations of the family dynamic, and as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I knew that things couldn't go on the way they had been. I wasn't sure how it would all unfold, but I finally realized that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for the sake of keeping the peace. It was time for boundaries. It was time for change. The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. I stood there, chest heaving with the remnants of the anger and exhaustion I had been bottling up for months, while my family remained unnervingly still. I wasn't sure what I expected them to say. Maybe I thought they'd finally realize how much I had been struggling. Maybe I thought that this would somehow be the wake-up call they needed. But instead, all I got was a heavy silence. My mom was the first to speak, but her voice was soft, almost unsure. "Jack, I had no idea it had gotten this bad." Her words stung, but in a way, I appreciated her honesty. The truth was, I didn't think she fully realized the extent of it either. She had always been the one to keep the peace, to make sure everything looked fine on the surface, but she hadn't seen how deep the cracks had gotten beneath it all. And maybe I hadn't let her. Maybe I'd been too afraid to admit how much I was struggling because I didn't want to disappoint her. "Yeah, well, I've been trying to hold everything together, Mom," I said, my voice still shaky. "But it's not working. I can't keep doing this alone." Lisa and Tom didn't say anything. They just sat there, looking uncomfortable. I wanted them to say something. Anything. But I realized they didn't even know what to say. Maybe they thought I was just venting, that it would blow over like all the other times I'd brought up how exhausted I was. But I wasn't going to back down this time. I couldn't. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, turning to look at them directly. "I'm not going to keep playing the role of the responsible one, the one who fixes everything, when you two aren't even trying to help yourselves." Tom shifted uncomfortably on the couch, but he didn't speak. Lisa just stared down at her phone, as though the whole situation wasn't even happening. It was like they were living in a parallel universe where none of this was real. I couldn't understand how they didn't see the damage they were causing, or maybe they just didn't care. Either way, I knew that I couldn't let this continue. "You both need to understand something," I said, my voice steady now, though my heart was still pounding. "I've been trying to help, trying to give you both space to figure things out, but it's not working. I can't do it for you anymore." There was another pause, and then my mom, who had been silently observing, finally spoke again. "So, what are you saying, Jack?" I took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do, but it still felt like a massive decision. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everything. My sanity, my well-being, my future. If I didn't make a change, I was going to lose myself in this mess. "I'm asking you both to leave," I said, my voice firm but low. "I need some space. I need to be able to breathe again. I can't keep living like this. I've tried to be understanding, but I've reached my limit." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a moment, no one moved. My mom's face paled, and I could see the shock in her eyes. She had never expected me to say something like that. I had always been the one to step in to protect everyone, even when I was drowning. But I couldn't do it anymore. Not like this. "Jack, please," my mom said, her voice shaking now. "Don't ask them to leave. They're family. We've always been here for each other." "I know, Mom," I replied, my throat tight. "But family isn't just about living together. It's about respect. And right now, I'm not getting that. I've been sacrificing everything, and for what? To keep everyone comfortable while I fall apart?" The room was tense, the air thick with the weight of my words. Lisa finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with confusion and a hint of anger. "What do you mean, leave?" We're family, Jack. We're supposed to help each other. I've been helping, Lisa, I said, my voice firm. But you've been using me. You've both been using me, and I can't keep doing it. I need to take care of myself for once. Tom, who had been quiet until now, shifted uncomfortably. So, that's it then? You're just kicking us out? I looked at him, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. I don't want to kick you out. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives. I want you to grow up and do something for yourselves. But I can't do that for you. I've given everything I have, and I'm empty. My mom let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping. I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I thought I was helping by keeping things together, but I see now that I wasn't. It wasn't easy for me to say those words, and it wasn't easy for anyone to hear them. But in that moment, I realized I had taken a step I'd been avoiding for too long. It was time to put myself first. It was time to stop pretending that things were fine when they weren't. I wasn't being selfish. I was being honest, and that was something I hadn't done in a long time. That night, after the conversation had died down, I retreated to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted but oddly calm. The weight on my chest had lifted a little. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew that I had made the right choice. I had finally set a boundary. I had finally stood up for myself. It felt both terrifying and freeing at the same time. But most of all, it felt like I had taken back control of my life. The next few days were a blur of emotions. The house was quieter, but that didn't make things easier. In fact, it felt like the silence was suffocating. I hadn't expected it to be like this. I thought I'd feel relief, and I did in a way, but I also felt the weight of the decision I'd made. There was a strange mix of peace and guilt, as if my emotions couldn't quite decide which one should dominate. Lisa and Tom had packed their things and left, though not without some resistance. Tom had tried to argue, throwing around words like ungrateful and selfish, but I didn't flinch. I had already made my mind up. Lisa had been quieter, avoiding eye contact for the most part. The confrontation had been difficult for both of us, and I could tell she was hurt, but I wasn't sure if it was because she genuinely cared or if it was just because her free ride had ended. Regardless, they were gone, and the house felt emptier than I had ever imagined. My mom, however, was still here. She had taken a step back during all the drama, probably not knowing how to handle everything. She had always been the peacemaker, trying to keep things from escalating, but I could see now that she was struggling with what had happened. I had hoped, deep down, that she'd understand, but there was still a part of me that wondered if I had made a mistake. The first evening, after they left, my mom sat down beside me on the couch. It felt like an awkward reunion after a long, drawn-out fight. There was an unspoken tension between us, the air thick with things that hadn't been said. "Jack," she began softly, her voice trembling just a little. I don't know what to say. I know I should have noticed how much you were hurting. I've been so caught up in trying to hold everything together that I didn't see what was really going on with you." I turned to look at her, seeing the guilt in her eyes. It wasn't easy to see her like this. I had always looked up to my mom, but I had spent so much time feeling like I couldn't rely on her. I had been waiting for her to step in, to see me, but she hadn't, and now she was admitting it. "Mom, it's not just about what you saw or didn't see," I replied, my voice softening. "It's about what I allowed to happen. I kept hoping that things would change if I just kept being patient. But I was lying to myself. I wasn't taking care of myself. I didn't realize how much I was sacrificing until it was too late."
She nodded, taking in my words. "I should have known better. I should have seen how much pressure you were under. I'm so sorry, Jack. I just didn't want to make waves."
I thought if I kept everything calm, it would all work itself out. "I get it, Mom. I really do," I said, trying to reassure her. But keeping things calm wasn't enough. It was just enabling the problem. I didn't need calm. I needed change. I needed to be seen. And I finally realized that if I didn't speak up, no one else was going to. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of everything sink in. It wasn't easy for either of us. My mom was a woman who had spent her life keeping the peace, avoiding conflict at all costs. She was the one who smoothed things over when they got rough, the one who held the family together. But this time, she had to face the reality that things had gone too far. "Do you think it was the right decision?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching mine for answers. I didn't hesitate. Yes, it wasn't easy. And I'm not sure where. We go from here, but I know it was the right thing. I couldn't keep living like that. I couldn't keep pretending I was okay when I wasn't. It was destroying me. She let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping. I understand. I don't like seeing you hurt, but I understand why you did what you did. And I think it was the only way for you to start healing. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was being truly understood. My mom wasn't just trying to make excuses for everyone. She was acknowledging the reality of the situation, and that meant everything to me. The next few days were a period of adjustment. The house felt strange without Lisa and Tom. It was quieter, yes, but it was also strangely peaceful. I started to notice things I hadn't paid attention to in months. The way the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window in the morning, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the sense of space that had been absent for so long. I took the time to focus on myself. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, and I even started picking up hobbies I had abandoned when the weight of everything became too much. I began to realize that I had lost myself in the chaos of trying to fix everyone else. But now, with some distance, I was starting to find pieces of myself again. But the guilt didn't completely fade away. There were moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing, if there was a better way to handle it. I still cared about Lisa and Tom, despite everything, and I wondered if this decision would hurt our relationship forever. My mom and I had a lot of quiet conversations after that, just checking in with each other, making sure we were okay. It wasn't easy, but it felt like we were slowly rebuilding something. I was no longer the one who had to keep everything together. I was allowed to let go, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. But as time went on, I began to realize that this was just the beginning. The decision to ask Lisa and Tom to leave wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a new chapter. A chapter where I could begin to heal, rebuild my life, and most importantly, take care of myself. The days after I asked Lisa and Tom to leave were a strange mix of freedom and uncertainty. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. The house felt different, lighter, more spacious, yet it carried an emptiness that I hadn't expected. I had become so used to the noise, the tension, the constant feeling of being needed, that now, in its absence, I felt both a sense of relief and a quiet sadness. It was as if I had let go of something significant, something I hadn't fully realized I was holding on to. I didn't waste time dwelling on the emptiness, though. Instead, I focused on the things I had neglected for so long. For the first time in what felt like ages, I woke up in the morning and didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. I started small, cleaning out my room, organizing my space. I hadn't realized how chaotic everything had become until I took a step back. The clutter around me mirrored the clutter in my mind, and as I tidied up my room, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't had in months. But the real change came when I started spending time with myself again, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. I picked up books I had abandoned, dusted off my guitar, and even started journaling again. These small acts, these moments of self-care, reminded me of who I was before the weight of responsibility had taken over. I began to see myself as more than just a caretaker or a problem solver. I was Jack, just Jack. And for the first time in a long time, that felt good. I also made an effort to reconnect with old friends. It was strange at first. Some of them had drifted away when I became too consumed with everything at home. But now, with the space to breathe, I reached out, and to my surprise, they were there. They understood. They knew how much I had been carrying. We had dinners, went for walks, laughed at old jokes, things I hadn't done in years. In their company, I felt a sense of normalcy returning, something that had been missing from my life for a long time. The best part of all of this, though, was the relationship I began to rebuild with my mom. We were no longer tiptoeing around each other, avoiding the things we needed to say. The guilt and tension that had been between us started to dissolve, replaced by something more genuine: understanding. She apologized for not seeing what I had been going through, and while I appreciated the apology, I didn't hold it against her. I realized that she had been trying to hold everything together too, just in her own way. But she hadn't known how much I had been sacrificing until it was too late, and I hadn't known how much I needed her to truly see me. One evening, as we were sitting in the kitchen, having coffee, just the two of us, she looked at me with a mix of concern and love in her eyes. "Jack, I know you've been through a lot, and I know you're healing, but do you think there's any chance for things to get better with Lisa and Tom?" Her question hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I had spent so much time focused on my own recovery that I hadn't really thought about what came next with them. My relationship with Lisa and Tom was fractured. I could see that clearly. But there was a part of me that still cared, that still hoped things could be different. I didn't want to hold on to bitterness, but I also knew that I couldn't just go back to the way things were before. The boundaries I had set were necessary, and they had to stay in place no matter what. "I don't know, Mom," I replied honestly, my voice quieter than usual. "I think I need some time. I'm not angry anymore, but I can't just forget everything that's happened. Maybe in the future we'll figure it out. But right now I need to focus on myself." She nodded, understanding. "I get it, Jack. You've done what you needed to do, and I'm proud of you for it. I know it wasn't easy, but I think it was the right decision." It felt good to hear that, to hear my mom acknowledge that I had done something difficult and necessary. It made me realize that I had made the right choice, even if the path ahead was still unclear. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held, whether my relationship with Lisa and Tom would ever heal, or whether they would stay distant forever. But I did know that I was no longer going to sacrifice my peace of mind for the sake of others. I was putting myself first, and that felt like the healthiest decision I had made in years. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a new sense of normal. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't without its challenges, but I was beginning to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The uncertainty was still there, lingering in the back of my mind, but I was learning to embrace it instead of letting it paralyze me. The fear of the unknown had held me back for so long, but now I was learning to move forward, step by step, even when I couldn't see the entire road ahead. I knew there would be hard days when I'd question if I had done the right thing. But for now, I was giving myself permission to heal, to grow, and to rediscover who I was without the weight of everyone else's problems on my shoulders. And that, in itself, was enough.